What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. We are live from the Hot Chicken Old Town, Scottsdale, Arizona. It's episode 787 of the podcast. We are brought to you by TickPick.com. Anthony says he's never heard of TickPick.com.
I have not.
We're going to tell him what TickPick.com is. It's the #1 ticket marketplace based in New York City with no hidden fees. You can use the promo code capital OSHOW20. That's OSHOW20 for 20% off your next order. Head on over to TickPick.com. Again, episode 787 of the podcast with Mr. Anthony Mink. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Dude, it's my pleasure, man. Thanks
You're
for having
traveling
me.
all over the place, so you got to go to Hawaii in the morning. I caught you right before your flight.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here to catch up. I really admire what you've done. Like I said before the show started, you're just getting up reps, man. And I think for anybody out there who wants to have success in anything, it really comes down to reps.
It does.
You know, and that is when I got started, man. I knew nothing, and I did similar to you. I just sat down and I just started practicing. And, the proverbial reps over and over and over again. And after time, it pays off, man.
Oh, my God. I was a total introvert when I started this.
Yeah?
I remember growing up, my parents couldn't get 2 words out of me. I'm like, I want to be a talk show host. My dad's like, you're not going to be a talk show host. I guarantee you. And I started this, total introvert, didn't know how to ask compelling questions. Honestly, didn't even know how to hold a conversation with someone when I first started this when I was a teenager.
So why do this then?
It was always a dream of mine.
Okay.
For whatever reason, it always clicked for me, like growing up watching New York Yankee games on television. Like, he gets paid to just call New York Yankee games and analyze baseball. I want to do that. And then that's spiraled into starting a podcast kind of as a resume builder and talking to all walks of life. And when COVID hit, especially, nobody had an excuse not to talk to me. So I started reaching out to every single buddy. And I think the first big name we ever got on was Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street.
Sick.
And I started learning more about the sales industry. I'm like, that's interesting. Then I started getting more and more into music. My brother is a big musician. He lives out in Nashville, aspiring to be a big musician, insanely talented. Started getting more into music, diving into interviewing more musicians, more actors, more actresses, more entrepreneurs, people who work in business, like I said, insurance, solar, just sales in general, it doesn't matter, software.
Yeah.
Just trying to learn more and more
It's interesting,
about
man.
everything.
I love that you went from being an extrovert to then like diving in and just figuring it out and getting to the point where you can have a conversation with anybody. I think almost all of our success in life is going to come down to our ability to communicate.
Yeah.
How well can we engage, build rapport, and ultimately create conversation with someone either in an industry that's completely similar to ours or completely different. And I think we said this again before the show started, but you've talked to Magic Johnson and all the way down to Lisa Ann, and the spectrum of people that you're able to sit down and have a conversation with is great.
You asked me how many either dream interviews I've had or like some of the most favorite interviews I've ever had. Who's someone that you'd want to talk to one day?
So I'm just getting ready to start my first podcast, and I have a hit list. That's like my top 10, and I went like all out, like the biggest ones. For me, it's like I actually just had the opportunity to meet Tom Brady in Florida, and I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with him. It was just like a handshake picture type of deal. Tom Brady, like I'm a big business guy, so I'd love to talk to Tony Robbins, Richard Branson, David Goggins.
Of course.
There's an entrepreneur I really love. His name's Andy Frisella.
First Form.
Yeah, First Form.
I'm doing the 75 hard right now.
Real AF,
actually,
yeah. So for me, because I'm in that business world, my head's there all day long. I just want to talk to the entrepreneurs that I admire most and really just be able to have a conversation and like, what are the moments that led to this, or what decision did you make in this situation that led you to that? But I think there really is no shortcuts. The only shortcut we have is like the gift of each other. One of the things I believe is the greatest gift we have in life is the gift of each other. Because you can have a whole life of experience, all these different circumstances and situations, and you can share those with me, and now I've just collapsed all that time it took you to learn that lesson, and now I've got it. And so I think, honestly, the reason why I love podcasts and why I wanted to start my own is part of the fact that like we're all learning and growing every day, and if we're sharing the best lessons and takeaways, then collectively, it's cliche, but a raising tide raises all ships.
It does, as long as you're paying attention.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen it so many times where kids my age will have the opportunity, be afforded the opportunity to learn from the best of the best, and then they don't apply it. You know, there's like a mental blockage there. But like if you're able to apply all of that knowledge and you know what you're doing and you know what you want, sky's the limit.
Yeah, I think this morning actually I was thinking about this. Like, what are actual superpowers that we could have in life? And I think the ability to learn is like one of the best superpowers in the modern world, because information is coming at us so fast, right? But then, so being able to like categorize and assimilate information at a really high rate so we can learn and grow faster, but also being able to reflect and be self-critical. I feel like, to your point, we live in a world where a lot of people are just moving so quick that they're not ever taking the time to step back, pause, and reflect. Why did this happen? Why did that happen? Oh, when this happened, that led to this. What can I learn in that situation? Or one of the things I tell my team a lot is like, if you're at the source of the same challenge happening with multiple people, you're probably part of the problem. You know, like, so where in our lives do we have the same exchange or friction points with you and with you and with you? Oh, those are all the same. Maybe I need to look in the mirror. That self-reflection, I think it takes a lot of courage to really be critical of ourselves and try to identify where maybe we're coming up short or where our faults are. And so because of that, I think it's a superpower that if we develop it, it gives us a leg up on just about all situations, because we have the ability to learn, take a step back, and then apply ultimately over time.
That's right, and that's where like communication is key. More so comprehension than communication too, because like you might see something in yourself where you're like, I'm way better at this than so-and-so, where they could be better at that, or vice versa. There's something that they're more talented at that you're not. But you also talk about being self-critical. Like you could be too self-critical to the point where it's like, man, like I'm the only one experiencing this, and I'm the only one that's like kind of going through this, when it's like, no, everybody else on your team probably is. You just got to communicate that, and everybody's going to be on the same page at how to lift each other up.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. I think there's definitely a point where, and I'm very guilty of this, where it's just like you're way too self-critical to the point where you hinder yourself and hold yourself back. But I don't know, man. I just feel like, to your point of being able to reflect on different moments and situations, I feel like that is a skill that's lacking in the world today. And the more that we can do it, the more opportunity we have to learn and grow through the experiences.
So the keyword there, experiences. What were some of the early on experiences that you had with team members / employees that kind of helped you learn along the way? Like some of those failures early on, either things that didn't go right on their side or things that you probably could have done better on your side as an employer.
Yeah. I think the first thing that I've learned is no one's born with leadership capabilities. Like no one's born a quote leader. And I got into business because I wanted to make money. I didn't give a shit about anything else. Like I came from a poor background. We had very humble beginnings, and I just wanted to learn how to build a life that I wanted to live versus living someone else's life, if that makes sense. And so in the beginning, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't even want to have employees. But as you start to build a business, one of the things you learn is there's a certain scale capacity or a cap on what you can do. And in order to get to the next level, you have to enroll people.
Yeah.
And I think that word enroll is probably one of the first biggest lessons I learned. I think the number one responsibility of a leader is to first lead himself. And I think leadership is it's a privilege.
Yeah.
Like there's people that lead from a position of authority or through a position of integrity, if you will. And I think the integrity is earned by leading yourself first and showing that, hey, your actions are speaking louder than your words. And so that was the first lesson, is like, if I'm actually going to be a good leader, I have to lead with authority, or excuse me, with integrity, right? Not from a position of authority. But then beyond that, I think you have to enroll people into a vision. Everyone wants to feel like they're a part of something, like they can contribute, like they can grow and expand. And I think there's a lot of fault of leaders that I see in the world is they're very selfish, and they don't see it as an opportunity for them to grow through their team, but for them to grow because of their team, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think there's a threshold. Most entrepreneurs start out with truly just wanting to make money. And yes, there's some people that they have a passion and a purpose and some change that they want to make in the world. I actually think that's a very small minority of businesses. Most people are like you and I, we're hungry, we're motivated, we're self-starters, and we want to go out in the world and make something for ourselves. And that's totally okay.
Yeah.
But ultimately, once you build some momentum and start making some money, you realize, wow, like there's a lot more fulfillment that comes from seeing other people around you win.
Yeah.
And so I'd say that was another big lesson I learned of leadership is I thought that the purpose of my employees in the beginning was to help build the company. And now I realize the purpose of me is to help build like my team or my leaders. And I don't mean like in the sense of build them in the company, but build them individually, make them better, help understand what their goals are, how they want to grow, and put them in a position and coach and train and enroll them into a bigger vision for themselves.
Was there an exact moment with a specific person that it kind of clicked for you? Like you almost like sculpted someone's mind and they like reached a level of fulfillment and happiness to where you were like, oh, like that felt good.
You know, it actually happened for me.
Okay.
So a couple years ago, I had a couple different offers to sell the company. And it was for 8 figures, more money than I ever thought I'd be able to make. And I had to take a step back and I was like, what the fuck am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
Like, I've never had to make a decision for this amount of money. And as I was chewing on that decision and thinking about it, playing chess in my head, I could do this, I could do that. If I make this move, this happens. And then I just took a step back from it and I was like, well, what do I want next? And what I realized is at this point in my life, I'm taken care of financially. And then I started to think, okay, like if I took money off the table, what would I want to do? And then I was like, I have the most amazing team at my company.
Yeah.
Like, I love these people. And like, give you an example. Like, I hired a guy and he comes in, he's a customer service rep. So for all intents and purposes, if you look at an organizational chart, it's at the bottom. He comes in, he's like, I'm so excited to be here. This is my dream job. Like, this is the exact company I want to work for. And I'm like, wow, I'm providing that for people. And so it was when I got to a place where I realized I was taken care of, like I could sell the company, I could, not have to work again if I didn't want to, I'd be okay. But then I was like, wow, I now am in a position where I know I'm taken care of, so how can I serve these people on my team? And I looked around at the different diversity of people and stories and experiences, and I just felt like I had provided this vehicle, because all businesses are as a vehicle.
Yeah.
And there's different vehicles, and people ride them for certain periods of time, and then they get off and jump on another one or start their own or whatever. But I was like, we have this vehicle, and we've got this kind of special camaraderie on it. And what if, rather than focusing on what I can get from this vehicle, I focused on how much I could give through this vehicle? And then, this, but like, the secret to living in a lot of ways is giving. And the more that you give, the more that you're going to get back, right? And it's a universal law. If you are unselfishly giving and supporting, it's going to come back to you. So I was like, damn, actually, this is what I know is the right decision. And by doing it, the company will actually probably be worth 10 times more in the future.
Yep.
So I went all in on helping support the team and build an organization that they have opportunity in, because I was at a point in my career where I knew no matter what happened, I had the skills, the character traits, and the beliefs that I could create any result in any arena. How do I give my team, or as many of my team, that same confidence or same capacity? I think one of the, I was talking about superpowers.
Yeah.
I think another one of the superpowers that we can develop in life is a vision or belief for ourselves. And I grew up in an environment, I love my dad, he's since passed away, but he was a really abusive alcoholic. And so he used to call me worthless all the time and just was very degrading and always talking down. And so I grew up with a huge, like a lack of self-confidence, a lack of belief, and it's something I've really struggled with most of my adult life. And so I've come to believe one of the greatest gifts we can give to people is to breathe life into them. And I think, like, if you look up the word inspire, it means breathe life into, or breathe into. And I feel like what better gift can you give someone than breathing love, breathing hope, breathing courage, breathing confidence, breathing possibility into them. So for me, that moment clicked was not with someone else, but was with for myself, when I realized, okay, I'm going to be taken care of. I have the skills and tools necessary to always like build what I want. How do I try to gift that and inspire that or breathe that into as many people as possible?
And that's so fascinating too, because you've seen it go both ways. Like in your situation with like being raised by an abusive alcoholic father, right? In your own words, that could have gone one of two ways. You could have been the person you became today, or you could have been like the most bitter human being on the face of planet Earth,
Yeah. Well, I think, there's a parable, a lot of people have probably heard it, but it's like the two brothers, they grew up. So paraphrasing, two brothers, they had an abusive alcoholic father. One becomes very successful. One becomes an alcoholic and addicted. And when asked, how did you become the way that you were? They both said, look at my father. What choice did I have?
Yeah.
So they had the same experience, but they took different stories and meanings from it. I don't know where this comes from, but I just had an awareness, like growing up. The saying, when it rains, it pours?
Yeah.
that was my dad to a T. Like, he was the most negative person I've ever met
Just
in
a
my life.
curmudgeon.
Just, you know, the washer would break, then his car would break down, then you get a flat tire, then the roof would leak. Like, there was just always something wrong. There was he used to say, like, he had a dark cloud over him and it just followed him everywhere. And I observed that and I was like, damn, maybe if I'm just the opposite, even if things bad happen, maybe they'll just be less bad. And then my mom, at one point in time, she said, Anthony, promise me you'll never be like your dad. So I'm like, okay, Mom, I promise. So I just did the opposite of everything he did. And then as I got older, I realized, wow, you could model behavior, or you could do the opposite of the behavior that you're experiencing. Either way, you get to the same result in a lot of ways. You know, it's like sometimes you hear it said, people are either examples or warnings. You have to determine which is which. Are you going to follow the example, or are you going to heed the warning? I think that's why I think my father's probably one of the greatest gifts I've had, even though I've had the most pain and struggle and turmoil with him. He really gave me the perspective and the friction to like develop into who I am.
And do you feel like it's been difficult? I'm sure you've had experiences. I know I've had experiences where like you had to almost cut certain people out of your life to associate yourself with people that saw your vision or saw like, or even like employees, like who you bring onto your team. Like you want someone who sees that vision as opposed to someone who's gonna fizzle out in a few months, you know?
Yeah, I think the way I think about it is not necessarily like cutting people out, but like I'm gonna elevate my standards.
Exactly.
And if someone doesn't want to play at that level, that's totally fine. I've never been a fan of imposing like my beliefs, my standards on anybody else. But I also don't associate or don't end up spending long periods of time with people that aren't aligned and have the same values, same kind of morals, and ultimately the same type of beliefs, if you will. So I think one of the things as you get older, I know you're a little bit younger than me, you realize a lot of that stuff kind of works itself out just through default, because people that are driven like us, that have goals and ambitions and are working really hard, ultimately the people that don't, they kind of self-sort in a lot of ways, because they don't, like, we mirror what's possible for them, but we're an example of what they're not doing. And so oftentimes, and we see this with family members, like and I'm sure all of us have had this happen, you have a friend, a family member, someone you love that tells you, oh, you can't do that, you're not going to be good enough. You mentioned that happened to you with your parents with wanting to be a sports broadcaster. Growing up, I loved basketball, and you know, I remember I was like 10 years old playing basketball in the backyard. I'm like, Dad, I'm gonna play in the NBA one day. He's like, no, you won't. You'll never be good enough. And I remember that to this day, just a simple flippant comment, because why did he say that? He didn't say that because it wasn't possible for me. He said it because it wasn't possible for him.
Right.
And everyone is typically giving you their internal projection of what's possible for them, and they're trying to apply that over you. So oftentimes, by just staying consistent and committed to our journey, people self-select and sort themselves out. So I actually haven't been in a position where I've had to cut a lot of people off, but I'm just a maniac in a lot of ways. Like, I know what the fuck I want, and I don't compromise, and I work my ass off. And I feel like the older I've gotten, the less time I have for any bullshit. And so you just say, like, this is what the standard is. This is how I'm gonna show up. And I invite you to show up at that level, or I'm gonna ask you to just like step away and do your own thing. And so I just keep it moving.
And who were some of those like either mentors or idols that you had? You mentioned like an Andy Frisella or Tony Robbins, David Goggins before we came on too. Like, who are some of those people, even probably athletes growing up, that you mesmerized, you know? Like, who was it for you that you kind of mimicked yourself after starting out, whether it be in business or just your overall like identity?
Such a great question. I mean, in the beginning when I started my business, I had no reference for anybody that was successful. My dad was a logger. He literally cut trees down for a living. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And I just kind of got lost trying to find my way in the world. Worked a ridiculous amount of jobs, from McDonald's to door-to-door security sales to Verizon, mortgages, real estate. Like, I was just dabbling, trying to figure out what I wanted. And the person that I would say has had the biggest impact in my life, other than like family and my father, is Tony Robbins. When my mom was young and she asked me to never be like your father, I had to uncover why my dad was the way he was. So at a very young age, I started asking the question, why? Well, why does he do that? Why does he do that? And I started looking and observing behavior. As I got older, I saw a video from Tony, it's his TED Talk, and he says, I'm the why guy. I want to know why you do what you do. And I was like, shit, I've been searching for that answer this whole time. Like, I want to know why people do what they do. Like, and so I started getting to some of his content. And then as I started to make enough money, I started going to his conferences. And then ultimately I joined one of his highest level coaching programs and spent a year of my life traveling with him and just being around him and his community and the environment. And I got a firsthand experience to like really see how people that play at the highest level show up. And that in a lot of ways is how I've modeled a lot of my behavior. And then you start to connect the dots and you realize like the biggest lesson I got from Goggins, just like reading his books and watching his stuff, is like discipline. I mean, if you are just insanely disciplined and rigid with yourself, you have to find what balance works for you. But man, I mean, he literally has accomplished everything through just pure will and discipline, you know? So I think all these guys are gifts, but Tony's probably been the biggest influence on my life for sure.
You can't hide discipline either. You know, like a guy like Goggins or even Tony Robbins, for doing what he's done for as long as he's done it. Like those guys, you can even throw like a Frisella in there, like Grant Cardone or any one of those influencers you see today. When you meet them and you shake their hand in person, you could tell like you can't hide discipline. You're easily exposed if you're saying you're doing one thing and you're not doing it. Because some of these guys, they just have like a certain glow about them, where it's just like, you look different, you talk different, you walk different. Like you're confident. That's what it looks like, and that's what you want to feel like at the end of the day, right? Which pushes you. Like sometimes I meet people where I'm like, maybe I'm not working hard enough. You know, you look at yourself in the mirror, you're like, maybe I should step it up, and like you become more inspired to keep climbing that ladder. You know, just when you think like you're doing really good for yourself and you're giving yourself all the credit in the world, you almost get knocked down and humbled in a sense when you meet someone else. You're like, I want to be like that. Yeah,
to me, I think, going back to leadership, I think the greatest way to lead is through example, right? I want to inspire through action. How do I go out and live my own story and create my own results and build the life that I want? And just through doing what I want to do, that inspires people around us. Like, damn, like I knew him when he was doing that. Or like, can you imagine if I was able, you know, and you start to spark the imagination. And that's what Goggins does. That's what Frisella does. That's what Tony does. That's what athletes do. You know, I was a 90s kid, right? I was born 85, grew up watching Jordan, and I was just mesmerized by the hunger, the fire, the passion. And even today, I think the greatest athletes, they inspire us because they speak to the deepest parts of us, the part inside of us that knows we have more to give, or that we can show up and serve at a higher level, whatever that is. And so that's why I think the greatest gift we have is each other, and the ability to watch and learn and grow through each other's experiences and lessons.
Yeah, everybody wants to feel that level, that spiritual level of happiness, fulfillment. Everybody wants to eat well. Everybody wants to make a ton of money. Everybody wants to succeed at what they want to do. When did you figure, because I'm sure you figured this out at one point, where it's like, okay, I came from this life, I want this life, and in order to go from this to this, you need to make X amount of dollars, but also you talk about inspiring people and uplifting people and being that leader. When did it become more so about that resulted in money coming in, as opposed to you not even focusing on the money? It was more so focusing on building that culture that led to that, to where like everything's kind of moving like a smooth, well-oiled machine at this point.
Yeah, I don't think there's one moment. I think there's many moments.
You learn,
you know? For me, I would have never said it this way before, but the whole reason why I got into business in the first place was I wanted to create the quality of life I wanted to live. I wanted life on my terms. You know, and I think once you experience that, like once you have some success and are able to create the life that you want to live, you realize that how you thought it was is not actually the way that it's going to be. I had this idea in my head of like, man, once I get here, everything will be fine. And then I got in a place where I was making more money than I ever thought possible with my first business, working less than I knew was possible. And I was like, holy fuck, I have made it. But I had like really no sense of purpose or fulfillment. And one of the things I learned from Tony is success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. And I was like, damn, I've done more than I thought I could do, and I feel empty. And that's when you realize it's not about what you can give, it's about what you can give. Or what you can get, it's about what you can give. And so I don't know when that moment was. I think it's just a progression over time. You know, at first I'm just trying to build the belief in myself that it's possible, and you start to like stack some wins and get some results. And then I think the farther you go, the farther you realize you can go, because we all have these limits of belief, and we're like, I don't know if this is possible. And then you start to bump up against that and you're like, holy shit, I got here with this foundation. Imagine how much farther I can go now that I have this foundation. And so if it really does just start to compound. I think everybody knows what compound interest is in a financial sense, but I like to think of it in every sense of our life. Like, you're developing compound interest in your communication skills at 787, you said, right? So you've done so many reps. Now you have the capacity to communicate with anybody. We develop compound interest in our health, in our relationships, in our intelligence, the more we feed and strengthen our mind. So I've always just looked at it as, how can I take this foundation that I've built here and add skills to it, right? I think one of the things I've learned is there's typically 3 things we need to create success in our life. There's the character traits that are required to build whatever the skills we need are. So there's certain character traits that create certain skills. And then skills give us the capacity to do certain things. And then ultimately we got to have a belief that we can actually do it, right? So it's all of our success, if we were to sit back and reflect on it, is a combination of character traits, skills, and beliefs. And the more that you develop the beliefs, the more that compounds the character traits and the skills.
You just got to get up and try,
Yeah.
you know? Because like you said, it's not going to turn out the way you exactly envision it in your head, because what you're envisioning in your head is almost like too perfect. So you don't even want to take that first step and mess that up, right? That's where some people freeze and get isolated.
Yeah.
Where like with LiveBearded per se, you're saying that when you first started, you're like, it was going to be about this and only this. You didn't really think it was going to turn into other avenues, because based on the product and how people were perceiving it, the feedback you got, you're like, oh, this can be more than what I originally thought it was going to be, based on those experiences that you had by taking that leap and starting in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I tell my team all the time is like, hey guys, the first time we do something is always going to be the worst time we do it.
Yeah.
But if it's worth doing really bad until we learn how to do it well. And I think you're so spot on with that point. Like, when I started LiveBearded, I thought it was going to be a small little beard company, just a side project, just something, until I figured out what the next thing was. Fast forward 7 years, it's bigger than I could have ever imagined. And that was just by, you drive as far as you can with the headlights, and you keep driving, and you can drive as far as you want with headlights by going, 100, 200, 300 feet at a time. So I think, to your point, the one thing that holds people back the most is they think that they have to have it in a very specific way before they get started. But ultimately, the most important thing is that you just get started.
Yeah.
Using you as an example, I mean, your first 100 episodes, they were probably pretty bad in comparison to
they're still out there.
Yeah. So I think the best thing we can do is just give ourselves the opportunity to learn through repetition.
Yeah. And even like on that example, like first 100 episodes, that's 100 tries. It's 100 tries. I look back at those, they all sucked, right?
Yeah.
Like, just people are afraid to take that first step. Like, you got to keep doing it over and over and over and over again until it gets to a point where it's muscle memory and you just know how to do it, whether it's communication skills or you're selling someone on something, everyday work at your office, at your desk, doing whatever it is that you do. You need to keep doing that and just like instill it in your brain to the point where it's like you wake up and you just know how to do it.
Yeah, and the crazy thing to me is some people, like, how long, you've been doing this for how long?
Like 7 years.
7 years, yeah. So that's 100 episodes a year, over.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people will take 5 years to do 100 episodes, or 10 years.
Yeah.
And so much of this just comes down to how often are you willing to take the swings, and whether it's with podcasts or with any area of life, I believe the road to the success we want is paved with the failure we're willing to expose ourselves to. And the more that we can fail, the quicker we can get through that growth process, the faster we can actually become good at something.
Yeah.
And most people are so paralyzed by the idea of looking bad or failing or being dumb or losing money or making a mistake, that they actually just never give themselves the grace to learn through failure. Well, I have a saying in my life, it's like and this came through LiveBearded, but it's my responsibility to do better every day, to learn from my mistakes, grow through my failures, and strive to be the best that I can be.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of the credo of excellence in a nutshell. It's like, it's your responsibility to get better every day. You learn from your mistakes and grow through them.
Yep.
And then just stack those together over time, and you're be significantly better off in the long run.
And 9 times out of 10, everybody, whether it's in your neck of the woods doing what you want to do, or it's something else in life, they're going through something very similar, where like they're going through like the self-doubts, or they're failing and being like, I'm the only one going through this. Like I was mentioning earlier, for me, like 700, 800 episodes in, it's like there are times where I'm like, what am I doing wrong? How can I get to the next level? Like I'll have conversations with like my dad per se, and he's just like, dude, do you even like listen to the people that you interview? Everybody went through failure at one point or another. They all went through shit to get to where they're at now. Like, take note. Like everybody's going through the same thing, and you just got to adapt and learn from those mistakes.
Yeah. It's so true, man. I remember I had this idea of creating content for a long time, and whether it was a podcast or a video series or whatever. And truthfully, I was like, oh, I'm not ready yet. I haven't made it. I'm like not successful enough. I need to have a certain resume or a certain success in business to be able to be credible. And so I was always kind of punting it down the road. And I thought, once I get here, I will be successful. And then I mentioned Andy Frisella. I was listening to his podcast, and he talked about this in a way that I'd never heard anybody. And he's like, I always feel like I haven't accomplished anything yet. He's like, I got $1 billion company, and I've done all these things, and I still feel like I'm barely getting started. And he just talked through it in a way that I've never heard anybody say. I feel like most people that get to a certain level of success, they don't talk about the fear or the failure that they still currently experience. And they kind of, and at least this is the way that I perceived it by watching all these different successful athletes and entrepreneurs. I perceived it like, well, now that they've gotten to that point, like the fear and the doubt is gone, and now they just like crush it.
Yeah.
And Frisella talked about it in such a way, and he's like, I know all the top guys. I've been in rooms with all of them. And when we're together, all of them are really talking about how they don't feel like they're good enough, or they've done enough, or they've made enough. And then they're always like, oh, damn, you're doing so well. And I was like, wait, I think he's credible. I'll take his word for it. All of them think that way. And I started to just reflect on this idea. And I was like, I'm going to call it the achiever's curse.
Yeah.
Because if you're an achiever, you always see how much farther you can go. And so you spend very little time reflecting on how far you've come, and maybe even less reflecting on like, oh wow, here's where I'm at, this is what I've done, and you're so focused on where you want to go. And it's that tension between how far you've come and how far you can go that creates that curse of like, I'm not good enough yet, or once I get here, then I will have arrived. And I realized that's a gift, rather than seeing it as something that is holding me back and I have to wait until I've gotten where I want to go. It's more being like, okay, cool, it's just part of the journey. And I think for me, one of the big changes for me and my business and my success took place when I realized that there is no destination that I'm going to get to where I feel like I have maybe made it. It's more just about the journey along the way. And how do I make the most out of every day? And so I've developed this, I call it my day one mentality. And like every day on Instagram, I do this stupid post. It's me getting in the ice bath, and it's day one of one. And I think if we approach every day like it's our first day, then we have the freedom to enjoy the process and enjoy the journey.
Because you know how many people start, for instance, like cold plunging, or like people who want to get into better shape, 4 or 5 days in, they're feeling better, they're feeling great, and then they feel like they could take a day off or they could take a break, and then all of a sudden you're right back to where you started and you wonder what happened. That's so right. Like you have to have that mentality of like, I'm starting today, even though I'm like 50 days in or 500 days in. It's like keep going, because if you take a day off, it's gonna train your brain to be like, I could do that again and again and again, and then you start over again.
Yeah, I think so. When I was in Florida and I got to hear Tom Brady speak, he was telling all sorts of stories about like college and different situations, and he told us this story when he was the 4th-string quarterback at Michigan, and he said the 1st-string guy was getting like 20 snaps. And then the 2nd-string guy was getting 10, and then the 3rd-string guy was getting like 5 or 6, and I was getting 2. And he's like, I was pissed because how am I ever going to get better or show what I can do with 2 snaps? And they had a performance coach that the coach was like, you should go talk to this guy. So we went and talked to this guy. And the guy was like, the way that you get more snaps is by treating those 2 snaps like they're the only thing that matters. And so he's like, I want you to run on the field like you've never ran on the field. I want you to scream out, ready down, set. You know, like with the same intensity that you would if you were in the Super Bowl. And so he's like, I went out there and I started treating those 2 reps, those two snaps, like they were my entire world. And the whole team took notice. And then I got 4, and then I got 8, and then I got 6, and then I was 2nd string, and then I was starter. And it's exactly what we're talking about. It's like every one day or every one snap, every one interview, whatever it is, if we just bring intention and purpose to that, those compound on itself, and where it leads is incredible.
Was Tom Brady a guy where when you first met him? Because I talk about certain people having like a certain glow to them, where it's just like you just want to be better just by being around them. That was probably one of those guys where it's like he's talked to billions of people too, so like you don't really know what to say.
Yeah.
And you just want to say something kind of impactful, even if it is just like, hey, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Fan of what you did for all those years.
Yeah, I mean, he was very different than what I expected. Because you see like the Jordans and the Kobes, they're fucking killers. Like they come out and they're talking like war stories. I wanted to take that motherfucker out. I was going to kill this guy.
Yeah.
You know, like I remember when he said that about me. And Brady was like, man, I just want to be the best I could be. He's like, I just love playing football, you know? And I'm sure, you know, he had a little bit of political correctness to what he was saying.
Of course.
But I really got the sense that it was at a Patrick Bet-David conference. I don't know if you know who PBD is, but I love
incredible story.
Love PBD, amazing story, exactly. Yeah, I joined his mastermind group because of that, and so that's why ultimately I was at this conference. I was listening to PBD, and he asked Brady. He said, "At what point did you decide you wanted to be the greatest of all time?" Brady's like, "Never. I never did.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be the best football player I could be." And he's like, literally, and PBD was like, come on, man. Like, you had to have a hit list. You had to get one more ring than Belichick or one more ring than Mike. Or you wanted to, and he's like, honestly, no. Like, I just wanted to show up every day and play the game that I loved and be the absolute best that I could. And I think when you hear a lot of these guys, you start to connect dots, and it's like, they all have their own approach to it, but one of those main dots is like, every day, just make the fucking most out of the day that you can with whatever you're doing. If you're chilling on the couch, like chill the fuck out, do nothing and enjoy it, you know? Or if you're hitting the gym or if you're at an office doing whatever it is, like I think that day one mentality, and that's just the way that I've languaged it for myself, but I think all the greats have that and they approach life in that way.
So you're going to Hawaii this week. You're going to come back. You're going to start shooting with the podcast.
Yeah.
You have your dream guests. You have the Frisellas. You have the Robins, the Goggins. I'll throw Brady in there too.
Yeah, for sure.
Who's someone that you think you could have a great conversation with that people would benefit from the most already in your circle?
Yeah. I have a really good friend. His name's Anthony as well. One of the most generous guys I've ever met. Young dude. He's like 32. He just sold his company for like 50 mil. And he hit me up. He's like, hey, man, I just got the wire. Like, you want to go celebrate? And he's like, there's not a lot of people that I can celebrate this with, blah, 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 right? Given the nature of the situation. So we go and we get acai bowls. We freaking just sit down. And I'm like, dude, what was the first thing you bought? I was like, what is the first thing you want to buy? And he's like, honestly, I don't want to buy anything. He's like, but I pledged 10 scholarships a year at the school that I went to. He went to like a nice prep school for all underprivileged kids. And I was like, this freaking guy.
Yeah.
You know, so he would be one person that's like a good friend of mine that's in my circle. It's a good question. I don't know. For me, I just want to, like, similar to what you're doing, I just want to get up reps. So I just want to start practicing in front of the camera, having conversations and sharing my experiences. The podcast is going to be called Entitled to Nothing.
That's right.
I think our lives are our fault. And for me, when I really took ownership of all the failures, all the fears, all the doubts, all the experiences, and said, my life is my fault. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. And if I don't like the way things are, look in the fucking mirror. Like, just taking radical responsibility, that's when my life turned around. And that's when I started to create more success, make more money, create better experiences in my life. And so I just want to share the lessons that I've learned through that journey, and then have amazing conversations with guests and people that I know. So he's the first guy that comes to mind. He's local, and he's going to be one of my first guests.
I mean, that's so true, though. Like, you're entitled to nothing. You control everything. Let's say even something out of your control happens and it does affect you. Sucks, happens to everybody, but it's in your control as to how you react to that.
Yeah.
Which isn't always the easiest thing, but it is.
Yeah.
Like, it is your fault how things go from there. If you spiral out of control, that's your fault.
Yeah.
That was your brain spiraling out of control, where it's like you can get it together and say, this is a tough situation, but we can make the most of it.
Dude, you're spot on. The stories that we tell ourselves are the greater challenge. The experiences that we have are going to happen, but it's how we label them. It's the stories we tell ourselves about them. Was it the end or was it the beginning? Was it a blessing or was it a curse? Like, we're making these decisions and then we're telling ourselves stories to reinforce those decisions. that affects us greater than the experience ever does. And we all know people that have had horrible things happen to them, and they turn it into this incredible success or gift or opportunity. And we all know a lot of people that have had horrible things happen to them, and it happened to them.
Yeah.
And then therefore that's their reason why they never did A, B, or C. And so I think it all comes down to how we react and respond, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the argument of the father and the two sons, you know? Like, in your life personally as well, you could have gone down one of two avenues. And luckily for you, you always believed in yourself. You didn't really need anybody else.
You know, it's interesting because I think one of the number one things we want as humans is agency, to be able to choose what we want, how we want, etc. But true agency is saying my life is my fault. And everything in my existence I've had an impact on, the way that I'm thinking about it, the meaning that I'm giving it, the way that I'm maybe showing up, or the energy that I'm putting into it. But that's a much more difficult thing to do because you have to have the courage to, again, reflect on where your shortcomings are. If you say, okay, my life is my fault, and you're in debt, your relationship sucks, your relationship with your kids aren't good, or you're just unhappy, that means you have to take responsibility for that. And I believe that by taking responsibility for it, you start to take power back in your life.
That's right.
You know, people say, there's this cliche saying, with great power comes great responsibility. But the question is, how do you get power? It's by taking responsibility.
That's right.
Because if you take responsibility for your circumstances, now you're in charge of them instead of them being in charge of you.
That's right.
And I think that's the paradigm shift that I've experienced firsthand. And that's really kind of what I want to chat about with the podcast, and then talk to amazing people like yourself that are out there and living life and experiencing things and have those lessons or those insights to share. So again, we can learn and grow together.
Oh yeah, man. I'm excited for you. I definitely want to hear more about it as you go along with it, and see what, you know, how you can make it the best it could possibly be. Because it seems to me that you've surrounded yourself with like-minded people that all have like really cool, amazing experiences, and have all learned from past failures, trials, tribulations, and have turned them and molded them into who they are today, which is really cool. Where can the people follow you on social media?
Right now, just at Anthony Mink on Instagram, building everything from there, but at Anthony Mink on Instagram is the best place.
I appreciate you coming on, sir. You want to go shoot hoops or something? We could do whatever here.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. This was episode 787 of the podcast, guys. Remember to comment, like, and subscribe on our YouTube channel at Jack O'Hara TV.